Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff, and I'm so excited to have Tom Pohl here as our special guest today. Tom is the head of LMG's penetration testing team, and he brought an important issue up as we were preparing for Cyberside Chats. So Tom, tell us what you want to talk about.
Yeah, so this week it came to light through a public disclosure from Truffle Security that Google in particular retroactively turned API keys that were meant to be public into sensitive credentials.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So they've been telling people for years that these API keys are not sensitive. They're just used as identifiers. And so these are in public internet-facing code. For example, if you have an embedded map in your website, right?
Exactly.
There might be an API key in there, no problem. So what exactly happened?
So apparently what happened was they now made it so you can enable Gemini in API access.
And so you can turn it on in a project.
So you turn it on, and once you turn it on, now retroactively by default, all of your API keys that are supposed to be able to be public are now sensitive credentials that can now be used to cost you money by using the Gemini API.
Okay, so apparently there are about 3,000 exposed Google API keys of this type, and Truffle Security found those. And if those are on your website, what can an attacker do with those?
Well, they can start using Gemini, and so
Cost you money.
Cost you money. They can do queries. They can
access your data.
Access your data. All the things that you can do through the Gemini API, you can now do with these things that you're publicly putting on your website for, Maps or Firebase or whatever it is that you've generated this API key for. That's Google's been saying for 10 years, this is just an identifier. It's not a sensitive secret. That now you can actually use. And they were always a little sensitive because queries on the Maps API.
Yeah, it could cost you money.
It can cost money, yeah.
Well, and I remember they were like, oh, we restrict it based on the refer header, but that's something that an adversary can manipulate. So, but the worst thing that could happen really is that it would cost you money and you might want to have alerts on billing and stuff like that.
Well,
so this is like next level.
And there's
right?
there's no refer header on the Gemini API.
Right.
And so no longer is that is the restriction.
Right.
So now it's like a free for all. That the model's endpoint is now you can use these keys for it without having to have any restrictions or any spoof anything in order to be able to use it.
Now, this sounded kind of crazy to me that Google would just do this. And it turns out in November, when Truffle Security submitted this issue to Google, Google came back and said, no, it's functioning as intended. And it took a few more conversations, it sounds like. They said on December 1st, after we provided examples from Google's own infrastructure, including keys on Google's product websites, the issue gained traction, and then Google reclassified the issue as a customer issue to a bug, and they started working on a fix. But it took some back and forth. It seemed like Google was not anticipating this, correct?
Yeah, I don't think they took it seriously until they realized that they could use it against Google themselves.
Oh, right.
Because those APIs that Google had created for their own projects were now able to list the private models for Google. And
so it's not like Google was like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Oh, wait, it's a bug.
Yeah, they're like, oh, it impacts us too. And I think that's
right.
what actually made them go, oh, wait, maybe this is something we should look at.
Probably. Now, there are ways you can restrict these API keys. So if years ago, when one of your developers put that API key up on Google Maps, they could have restricted it so it could only be used for maps.
Yeah.
But that's not the default behavior. And it sounds like that's generally most people did not take the time to do this. And Google was not really publishing that as a widespread best practice.
It kind of reminds me of Amazon S3
I was
buckets.
just thinking that.
It seems very much similar where it's like by default, it's public or open, or it'd be like, oh, you must have an S3 account. And it's like, well, anybody can have it.
Well, and hundreds of organizations had terabytes of data stolen because those S3 buckets by default were wide open publicly. And that's what we have here, where these API keys are wide open publicly. And if you enable Gemini, then anything in that project, any APIs that are publicly available can also be used to cost you money and to access your data and to leverage Gemini as well.
They Truffle use a term that I love. They called it retroactive privilege expansion. Which is brilliant. So basically, the default is, hey, you create an API key. It's good for all the Google services that could be used, that it could be used on. And so then now what happens is a new service comes along, it's good for that one too. And that's
Yay.
the problem, is that it's, retroactively, it's like, oh, I only enable it was only enabled for these 10 services. Well, now service 11 comes along, you enable it for your tenant, and now it's good for that one too.
I'm sure it makes it really easy for development purposes because poof, it'll just work
It'll
anywhere,
just
but
work.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
So, well, and this also it's about vendor trust to a certain extent as well. I mean, no third party is perfect, and some third parties will prioritize ease of use and making it simple for development. And then others will take a step back and put some more guardrails on from a security perspective, but that can make it harder to use. So you need to think about when you're doing your third party vendor management, when you're asking questions, ask them about their development process, because I think we see a lot. Microsoft, Google, all these major providers, they change features. They will modify things sometimes in ways that even they don't expect.
Well, and often, I used to be a developer, right? And
Oh,
often,
yes.
often, your hack, it works, leave it alone, don't touch it, right? So as a developer, you're trying to make things work, right? You're not, and that's key number one. Like, make it work, get it out the door. We'll worry about securing it later,
Right.
right? And the problem is that sometimes later never comes.
Right.
And
Or it
that's,
doesn't come until the hackers have already broken in and stolen all your stuff and made the news. So thank you to Truffle Security for getting this out there on the news, because it seems pretty important. And there's thousands of companies out there that have exposed API keys that need to start restricting them.
yeah. And it sounds like they turned all the keys over to Google. So hopefully they proactively help these organizations secure their endpoints.
Yeah, you never know. They might have. Any other takeaways from this, Tom?
Yeah. Oh, audit your keys, right?
Right.
Before enabling your API or AI services, audit your keys. You'll look at them before you enable AI, look at them after you enable AI.
Absolutely. I think that's good advice. Also, assume API keys are sensitive. And we had a good little back and forth about this because you were like, well, they weren't that sensitive. And I was like, they were a little sensitive, but treat them like they're sensitive unless you have them properly restricted and audited and you understand otherwise. Because absolutely, an API key has the potential to be a sensitive credential.
Well, and I think it's important just in general. It's not just a Google issue. I mean, there's other API keys out there for other, cloud-based services. So understanding however you've created an API key, is this a sensitive key? Is it not? Audit it, go through the due diligence and rigor to make sure you're using it appropriately and it can't be abused.
Well, and I know, Tom, from experience that you love finding keys during
Yes,
penetration tests
I do.
and you leverage them. Do you know any organization that is actually keeping an inventory of their keys?
Ooh, well, yeah, actually, a lot of organizations are starting to use key management, right? And I've seen a lot of terrible practices and it's evolved over time, right? I used to see things like, when you launch an instance, you're introducing the keys into the metadata service URL and that's the way that they're introduced. And now there's key management services where you boot up and then you go query key management in order to get the keys that you
So
need.
it's gotten more
It's
sophisticated.
gotten more sophisticated, but the problem is that it's, there's, Stack Overflow result number one still will tell you the wrong way to do things. And now that's what we're training AI on, right? And so, so like getting the source of truth for what's the right way today is sometimes complicated.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, make sure that you consult with somebody who's experienced or just do your homework before implementing these things. All right, so enforcing least privilege at the API and service level is key. No pun
Key,
intended.
ha.
Ha. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, when you enable a key, like, don't say, "Hey, just make this thing work." Make sure that you give it the least privilege required, right? So
Yes.
if you're
Like
creating a map
restricting the
key,
maps. Yeah.
if you're
API key
yeah,
just to maps.
just to match, because by default, Google's like, "Yeah, we make it work for any service." Well, that's not best practice, right? Least privilege is best practice. So even though they make it the default, go ahead and change the default.
Segment your AI development environments. So, in this case, the issue happens when you enable Gemini in a Google project where there are already existing API keys. If you start fresh as you're testing out Gemini and you actually test it out, you don't have to worry about this so much. So, again, segment that AI test environment so that when you're messing around with Gemini and you're just learning how to integrate it, it's not in a project that has existed for years.
Exactly. New project. Everything's on a project basis. So if you do things against an old project, you may get unintended consequences.
Yeah, and this, I mean, I think the concept applies outside of Google as well to really
Mhm.
any environment where you're using API keys. I'd say the last recommendation we have is to update your third party risk management to address these AI driven credential and cost risks. So, AI is evolving, and the way it's being built right now, the way it's being integrated right now is going to be different than in a year or 2 years. So make sure you understand how API keys are being used, expect them to change in the future, restrict them, and then keep up to date on the latest changes because it's going to evolve.
Well, exactly. Yeah, constantly. And especially as these AI companies keep changing their models. Like, how are they
Exactly.
making money? At first, they're trying to get usership, right? That's key driver number one.
Going to get more
And then later,
expensive.
they're like, wait, we need to make money now. And so as they do that, they're going to evolve their model, and their model changes are going to make changes for you. So things that and so watching your billing as their model unfolds and kind of keeping a track of that. Should there be billing alerts even for a Google Maps API? Absolutely, because I could come along
Yeah.
and I could cost you a lot of money as an attacker just by calling your Maps endpoint, millions of times. So yeah, put alerts in place, so that you're keeping your cost under control.
Absolutely. And I love AI tools. I find them extremely valuable. But right now, I feel like the AI companies, they have this like pot of water, and I am the frog. And they're like, hey, this water is so nice. It's at a normal ambient temperature. Come hop into it. And I hop in and I spend my 20 bucks a month on ChatGPT or whatever. And then it starts getting
Right.
warmer.
It's
And
only
it's
$25.
only 25.
Yeah.
Oh, and use this and use that. And all of a sudden, before we know it, everything has changed.
My Netflix $7 subscription per month is now like $27 a month. Yeah.
Well, yeah, AI, same way. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you use Google, definitely go and audit your API keys. This is a really big change that's occurred. And stay tuned for the next Cyberside Chats. Thanks so much for being our special guest today, Tom.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, please like and subscribe. See you soon.